everyone to the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee meeting this week. This is Representative Carolyn Partridge transmitting from her home in Windham. It looks like we have our entire crew here. Sharon has her beautiful daffodils, and we have our witnesses here. We're very thankful to be able to, of course, we're dealing with COVID-19 related issues. In a week or two, we'll be able to get on to our housekeeping bill, which is H656. But for now, we had a great conversation last week with Michael Snyder and Sam Lincoln. Sam didn't say a lot, but but he was there. But Michael, we're welcoming you. You're going to talk about forestry. Last week, you talked to us a lot about the state parks and the impact that COVID has had in some respects, but we're going to hear more about forestry, I think, this week. Or if you wanted to finish up with the parks and then move on to forestry, that would be fine too. So welcome.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Nice to see you all. Good morning. Am I transmitting okay, just to confirm?
You're sounding good.
Okay, great. And I can't see, I'm assuming Sam is on as well. I can't see him.
He is
Great.
on.
Excellent, Sam. And yes, and so thanks for the chance to visit last week. And we had anticipated just giving a rundown of both kind of aspects of our work on the parks and outdoor recreation impacts as well as forestry. That there's a lot to that other one. So and that's an area where Sam doesn't focus, so you had to listen to me. But I think today unless you have follow-up questions about parks and related recreation, I think we should just dive right into the forest side, because that's a pretty big part of what's going on. Sound good?
Yes. Are there any questions for Michael about the parks at this point? I don't see any hands, so go right ahead.
Okay. Well, just to close that, then I would just say, as we were indicating, there's really been no material change since we spoke last week with regard to parks. We're still in the trying to figure out if we can open, how we could open, when we could open safely and in a reasonable way. So that work continues, and we're hoping to be able to resolve that soon. And I'll leave it at that. Happy to keep you posted and let you know where that all lands. So as I teed up at the end last time, I guess our story here for COVID-19 impacts on the forest side of things. Remember, we often use the forest economy, the phrase, the forest economy, kind of like the tourism economy or the recreation economy, or the agricultural economy. Ag and forestry, part of the working lands economy. When we say forest economy, we mean a supply and value chain that runs from forests and the landowners, through the foresters and loggers who work in those woods, the truckers that move the material, the receiving mills and facilities that add value to harvested wood of all types. And so that is often broken into kind of primary processing, sawmilling, firewood making, pellet manufacturing, to secondary manufacturing of taking the boards that come from primary manufacturing, for example, and turn them into value-added flooring or cabinetry, etc. And so that's the entirety, and it's quite diverse, and it's all linked. It includes energy uses for heating as well as electric, and so it's diverse, it's complex, it's connected. And I just wanted to start with, we're going to talk about the forest economy and the impacts, and just to reset what we mean by that. And where I would begin is to say that at the very beginning, I think I indicated this last time, it was, I think, great and important that we were able to establish that at least the forestry and logging, the sort of primary end of the supply chain in forestry, were deemed essential. The secondary, the far end of the supply chain, if you will, was not. And on the one hand, it's really great, I think, to have established the importance, and there's a real reason for that, the forests of Vermont were and continue to supply important, necessary, critical goods and services for the pandemic response. Everything from packaging and of medical supplies, sanitation products, food products and packaging, paper for use, but also pallets, in transportation and distribution of all kinds of goods, as well as, I mean, we even had a facility here in Vermont being asked to create wooden cribs for hospitals. Energy, sawmills and wood chip producers supplying hospitals and schools with heating fuel. It's snowing here right now, so it's still actually of interest to have this heat.
Oh, Lord.
And then there's all the way to sawdust as a byproduct that's used in dairy. It's a very important component. So we're connected. It was deemed, it was pretty obvious that we needed it. And that was really great, both for just sort of the morale of our folks in the forest industry. But it's also just not the end of the story. And that's really where we want to pivot to, because it is disconnected and not all elements were able to work, and not all other, so you could have a facility being able to work, but the rest of their supply and their end users being disrupted, it means they couldn't really work. So we'd like to sort of unpack this a little, get into it, explain some of these impacts, and walk you through what we're seeing, that despite the good news that, well, it's essential, it doesn't just end there. It's complicated, and we can try to paint that picture for you. And so maybe at this point, I would reference that Linda told me that you have our market assessment, that we could look at that. It kind of explains sort of generally what's going on. And this is where I'll invite Sam to come in and maybe walk us through it. Before doing that, I would just say this is the result of Sam in particular leading some of our key veteran staff in listening, putting out feelers, making tons of phone calls. We developed a listserv, and we've just been very active in communicating out to Vermonters involved in the forest economy, and taking input, which is, where are you at? What is your status? What are your challenges? What are your needs? What are your successes? We've tried to compile resources and information and created a web page, listserv. We've been holding live webinars, welcoming folks to come ask questions, give us a chance to answer them. And so we've built this background of information as a snapshot in time, and to help us think about what's needed and how we can help. So that's where we've been busy. I want to acknowledge Sam for leading that in a big way and being very thoughtful about it. And maybe, Sam, are you ready? I can turn it over to you to maybe walk us through just sort of painting the picture of where we're at now. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. And Linda is sharing the screen of that presentation.
Got it.
If you can you see that, Michael?
I can. Sam?
Oh, good. And Sam, can you see that?
I can.
Okay, excellent. So Linda's going to drive, but you can just tell her when to proceed.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Again, welcome. Nice to see everybody virtually. And thanks for the intro, Mike. And I appreciate it. We have a great team to work with at FPR. So with the market assessment we performed was based on the survey. Many agencies and state government were putting out surveys of the impact. And at the time of the pandemic hit and the stay-at-home orders came, most logging contractors were shut down at that time. And it was unknown essentially what exactly might happen, because things were already seasonally on pause, but many of the sawmills had stockpiles of wood, the different plants and things like that, and so what things were going to look like was of concern on this survey that we were getting back, asking people what's going on in your world and your business, what do you need from us. What are the markets going to be after mud season was the top response we got back. So we communicated with people both in state, out of state, everything from a one-person sawmill to 500 employee paper mills, and around in 3 to 4 states here. And just building on the department's historical relationships with these enterprises and saying, essentially gathering this information, not disseminating anything that was proprietary, but just to give this snapshot, as Mike said. And in general, the forest economy has seen this double-edged impact. One is where the food and paper packaging products, some of these goods are essential. There's been strong demand for them. And some of these mills actually lacked inventory, needed loggers to keep producing wood to put into their yards, and still need that wood. Many of the mills were full of winter cut wood and had large stockpiles that they wanted to get sawed before the humidity came up and it stained or spoiled. And we saw the impacts on the paper mills of the offices shutting down across the globe, and the demand for paper products, printing paper, advertising paper, newsprint, magazines, catalogs, etc., all coming to a screeching halt. And so we're getting that all comes back all the way back to the forest, as Mike's presented, through that supply chain back through all of our rural businesses here, where they're getting calls and demand for some kinds of wood forest products, and they're being asked not to deliver other forest products, that there's no market or the prices drop significantly. And so the housing market has stopped, which again cuts off the market for stud lumber and various products used in the building markets. I think February and March saw about a 30% drop in housing starts. We haven't seen the latest updates from April yet, but it's pretty significant, and that stops a lot of the supply chain that needs to produce those goods. Furniture manufacturing, et cetera, is all impacted as you would expect. Linda, if you could scroll up through, please. One of the bright sides is the fuel price has been down so much. That is a big on and off-road diesel fuel are really the lifeblood of the working lands to keep trucks and equipment moving. The price is down and predicted to be down, but it's just like everything else that could change tomorrow. Moving along, as I said, the hardwood markets have generally were expected to be really poor because of it's more of a, I don't know if the disposable income is the right term, but more higher end purchases, or hardwood flooring and cabinetry and things like that and furniture are not at the essential side of a family spending power. But that's actually, we're starting to hear little trickles of positive things of both logs being exported, demand increasing for export logs, and in some places the hardwood log markets leveling out and starting to see a little bit of demand again. Moving into softwood, the stay-at-home orders drove a lot of people that went home were buying softwood lumber for projects. The do-it-yourselfers were home again. Everything from our very smallest to very largest sawmills in the region mentioned that seemed to be driving some demand. It wasn't necessarily going to sustain them all the way through this and keep them at full production by any means, but there's a lot of do-it-yourselfers that were using up a lot of 2x4s and boards and things like that as people stayed at home, and that helped. And we've also been hearing everything again from the local sawmills creating material for raised beds. There's a lot of a victory garden kind of mindset going on out there in the world, and people are buying forest products to help with that. And we have the Ames True Temper mill in Wallingford, Vermont, that has been emailing out and letting folks know that the demand for their tool handles, anything garden related, is driving. They're actually in a buying mode, again looking for ash logs to supply that market. As I mentioned, the paper mill is the paper products are on both sides of this, where we have severe demand stoppage from the offices closing and the stay-at-home orders, but on the other side, certain mills saw a great increase. We heard from mills immediately during the stay-at-home orders that are creating actual medical supplies, everything from tongue depressors to various products used in hospital setting that are coming directly out of some of the mills that buy forest products from Vermont, that they were under orders to remain in production and keep the supply chain moving, and that they were in short supply of pulpwood, and they needed loggers and truckers to continue to be able to supply them, and playing a really important role. Paper mills in Maine that have been switching away from the newsprint, catalog, and magazine paper have more to the food packaging, the brown paper as it's called, all those boxes that the FedEx and UPS drivers are tossing onto your porches are creating a lot of demand for that type of more durable paper. The mills that have switched to that have seen a steadier demand, and particularly for the grease-proof paper and packaging for takeout food and fast food meals and things like that. But in the midst of all that, on April 15th, as the assessment came out, we thought that low-grade wood was going to be where people saw their way through this. When, as in 2015 and 2016, you've heard Mike and I talk an awful lot about the collapse in the market for low-grade wood and the consolidation in the paper and pulp mills. And we thought that coming out of this, at least the next 3 to 6 months coming out of the pandemic, the low-grade wood that was being more on the paper and energy side was going to be the big driver, or at least the light at the end of the tunnel. I shouldn't say big driver, because there was still demand there. In the midst of this, on April 15th, the Pixel paper mill in Jay, Maine, which is one of the largest paper mills in the Northeast, had a massive explosion, completely unrelated to the pandemic, which tore the guts out of the mill. It was an enormous explosion. Thankfully, no injuries or loss of life there, but it put the mill out of commission. And they're a huge consumer of pulpwood from the entire Northeast, from basically I-89 to the coast of Maine, and into Quebec and down into southern New England. And this is as bigger a problem than the pandemic for Vermont's forest economy. That's cumulative right in the midst of the situation that we're dealing with. They're the largest consumer of pine low-grade wood, which is where Vermont has a lot of inventory and a lot of production of that. When you cut down a pine tree to make a nice pine board, there's also pulpwood, lots of pulpwood from pine trees created in forest management implementation, as well as the sawmills, the major sawmills that are making all our pine boards, create sawdust and pine, what they call a clean pine chip, the chip slabs coming out of those mills. And that one particular mill in this entire Northeast consumed a lot of that wood, and it is creating a huge pile up of wood that no longer has a market. The biomass plants will likely be filled very quickly by the type of production that mill took, but this is going to have a major impact on Vermont and all the states around us. They haven't announced if they're going to rebuild yet. They are buying in some what's called market pulp, which is sort of a pre-processed pulpwood that they can start making paper again. They are one of these mills that had converted to making packaging paper, brown paper. But it's unknown if, when, how long it might be before they start buying truckloads of raw pulp from suppliers in the region again. There's a lot of concern about that. And we've been trying to keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on over there. Even though it's 2 states away, it has an impact, I would say, easily from the Adirondacks all the way to the coast of Maine in terms of the markets. They're a big mill. So, and also there was a closure of a paper mill out in Nova Scotia in January that was an impact on a pollution, a wastewater situation. And that has also been sort of dominoing wood all the way back across Maine all winter that didn't have a home to the Far East. And so there's a big oversupply of pulpwood again in our forest economy. That we've just lost a couple of major producers and processors of that in the last couple of months. So Firewood has been relatively strong with the stay-at-home orders. Like the commissioner said, people are still burning wood today and keeping their homes warm. And firewood producers in many parts of the state have reported very strong sales. And there's hope that that will consume a lot of wood in the coming months. People are buying wood in anticipation of next winter, concerned that if something happens, they might not be able to get it. But we don't, and so far, we're not hearing of the low fossil fuel price impacting demand, which has historically been a bit of a trade-off. But we're not hearing too many reports of people choosing fossil fuels over firewood, even at the lower prices, which is very good. So, excuse me. And then we also had some calls, emails requesting information about the sugaring and the maple production, and we did some research into that, and generally found that there was a very strong maple production season, but bulk pricing is likely to be affected by a few parts noted in the assessment there. So I'll stop there if you have questions or comments regarding the assessment.
Thank you very much, Sam. That's an incredible piece of work. Sharon has her hand up. Sharon?
Thank you. I just wanted to kind of echo what Sam said at the very end about the bulk maple producers. I know that at least up in these parts, one or more of our producers have experienced that, where suddenly all the sales stopped and the orders, entire truckloads, the orders were stopped, even though they'd already been made. And so we have a huge backlog of the bulk maple that people are sitting on and worried about, because they can't, if you're selling to grocery stores and restaurants, you can't really afford to sell it in bulk, because your whole setup relies on a profit being made by selling it in smaller containers.
Yeah, it is across the working lands. This is just a new challenge. The loss of the light switch being flipped to various markets, and many businesses reinventing themselves and how they're moving product has been inspiring, and I think will reshape a whole new business format. But without people going into restaurants and sitting down and using all these products, it's definitely going to hurt. It's going to sting for a while, but I think we'll recover. It'll take some time.
So last week we heard that sugar has been a challenge to get a hold of, in part because a manufacturing plant in Yonkers is in the middle of the COVID epidemic, and also it was a bad sugar beet year. So this would be a moment where people would be really smart to support their local maple sugarers, and to stock up on syrup, which I think would be really helpful and it lasts forever as long as you don't open it. Anyway, that's my plug.
White sugar used to be the luxury item, with maple sugar for everyday use, and now we'll revert back to that.
Hey, what about our beekeepers?
That's right.
Yeah, I'm getting my bees on Saturday. Tom has his hand up. Tom, you have to unmute yourself.
Sam, it seems to me in the last week or 10 days down here, I've been seeing a lot more log loads being up and down the highways. Is that seasonal thing, or is that a market-driven thing, or am I imagining that?
Well, without knowing where they're going or what species they are, it's a little difficult to answer. But generally, the typical seasonal trend would be that there's a lot of winter wood cut and stockpiled at log concentration yards, that's then rehauled during mud season. The truckers are put to work redistributing that wood to the mills it was purchased for around the entire region. You could be seeing hardwood logs going to Quebec to mills, or softwood. You could be seeing pulpwood being shuttled around to the paper mills, generally under high production conditions in the winter. People try to what they call short haul it to a nearby, get it out to a paved road, to a concentration area as efficiently as possible during the high production season. Then that capacity is switched over to move it longer distances when the production season is down. So that could be what it is. The Canadian markets, the hardwood markets are opening up a little bit, but I don't know in terms of, typically all of you that drive south on Fridays from the State House are likely seeing all those Canadian trucks with Quebec plates going north with a lot of hardwood and softwood logs. How much that's resumed, I don't know. But I mean, where you are, Representative Bach, you could be seeing wood going to the paper mills in New York, pulpwood going over there. You've got major hardwood sawmills down your way that are, again, moving wood, winter cut wood around still.
Thank you.
Tom, where are you seeing them? Going through Chester or on 91?
And I look at them and they seem to be predominantly hardwood. I don't look that closely, but it just seems every time I go out, there's way more trucks than there has been all winter. Maybe I'm just imagining it. But I have another question. Maybe, I don't know, for Sam or Michael. Is that all right, Madam Chair?
Yeah, that's fine.
Is it too early to ask about the emerald ash borer damage, or is what's going on there?
It's not too early. It's still here, and we're still trying to slow the spread. And we're about to enter the flight season, which is a kind of a whole different realm where we have to adjust our practices accordingly. So our team, accordingly, is still on it. We have our sort of a group of our staff who are forest health staff and utilization staff working together to help spread the idea of slowing the spread and being and sharing with folks that information, as well as like where it is and what you can and what you can't do. So Sam, you want to sort of give the latest? I know we're about to push out some stuff on the EAB and the slow the spread messaging. So maybe a refresher on how that works. And this is seasonally appropriate. Your question's well timed because it's about to become active again.
June 1 begins what's the flight season of the emerald ash borer, when they emerge from trees or forest products that have not been treated, and they're searching for a new host tree. And so this is when our recommendations for how wood is moved is change. And from June 1 through September 30th, it's based on growing degree days when the borer will emerge from and look for a new host. So we are right now across everything from the utility companies that are tree trimming along the right-of-ways to the sawmills, the firewood producers, everything. We have a whole network built, as the commissioner said, within our department where we reach out to the various constituencies with messaging to remind them that the slow the spread recommendations change, that the flight season comes around as of June 1st, and that they need to be, we request that they follow the recommendations the department has developed that are the lowest risk methods for spread of emerald ash borer. So for instance, logging contractor harvesting ash products within the infested area, the mapped infested area, where there's confirmed EAB presence, that if they were going to take logs, that they would notify the mill in advance, and the mill would be ready to debark those logs and burn the bark immediately. Or if it's a firewood producer, that they would be prepared to put that ash wood in a kiln immediately, within one business day after they receive it. That is intended to mitigate the risk, reduce the risk of those borers emerging during the flight season from that. So the heat treatment kills them, the debarking, the grinding process kills them. If it goes through a chipper, it will essentially eliminate the EAB from being a threat. And so our first choice is that they don't move the ash out of the infested area during the flight season. That's the optimal choice. But with our diverse forests, it's very difficult to harvest any hardwood in much of Vermont without an ash component there, and so helping facilitate what our partners in the Forest Service call facilitating safe trade. We give out we've provided recommendations and the supporting information for people that are moving ash forest products to do it in the safest manner possible. And so we're about, as the commissioner said, we're about to send out a letter to the sawmills asking them to make sure they're communicating with all their suppliers, that if they're harvesting ash within the infested area, some mills have already taken it 2 years ago, took it upon themselves to request that no one moves ash logs to their mill during the flight season, that they will not accept them. Others accept them by scheduled delivery so that they can process them immediately in parallel with our recommendations. And so there's lots of good work going on, lots of collaborative work, and we do get calls occasionally of people doing things the wrong way, and we get them the information right away. And the slow the spread effort that we're working on with COVID-19 is very similar to the emerald ash borer. We want to protect the resource and minimize where it finds a host. So
Might be helpful by way of sort of reminder background that we're calling it slow the spread. Because so what's with that? Like what that we it's here, and it's highly destructive. It's been in 30 some other states and devastating effects, and we want to minimize that. This insect as an adult, well, as an immature, it doesn't move at all, but as an adult, it flies. It doesn't fly all that well, actually. That you can't really travel all that far, but it moves at 65 miles an hour in loaded material. And so that's why this is so important, to keep it in the places where it is, unfortunately, minimize that spread. Why? As Sam says, it's kind of like the pandemic response, in that in a way we're slowing it so as in part to minimize spread for sure, keep it wherever it is, all towards trying to buy time for biological controls of parasitoid wasps and fungi or bacteria, that biological agents that can control this non-native pest that has no such enemies here. That's being developed. There's continuing work on genetic work to build on a heritable resistance that it seems evident, at least in some populations, and also to develop new silvicultural guides for how to manage the ash that we do have. All of this is like emerging science and research and development. It's ongoing, it's somewhat hopeful, and we don't want to have things just go crazy before we've had a chance to actually put something in place that can maintain ash in our forested ecosystems for the long term. And that's our goal. So it's very similar and it's working. I'm very proud of our team and Vermonters. As Sam said, we've had folks in the industry voluntarily trying to make this work. And just to be clear, we took a different path than many other states would have when there were quarantines, et cetera. And we said, we got this, Vermont. We're going to do this our way, locally, helping each other with a coordinated approach. Again, all towards slowing the spread, buying time for more long-term control and recovery to keep ash on the landscape.
Michael,
Thanks. Tom, you can go ahead. But we have a bunch of hands up, and I just want to acknowledge we have John O'Brien's hand up, Terry Norris, Vicky, and then John Bartholomew.
Michael, going back to last fall, I think you guys, or I saw a map of the infestation sites around the state, and I was kind of surprised myself. Are you surprised by the quickness of the spread in Vermont?
No, I mean, what's surprising is that how long it took for us to find it as present here at all, given it was in every state and province surrounding us well before, and then because of the activity and movement, whether it's firewood, somebody coming from an infested area in southern New England coming to their summer camp, or even a state park campground in Vermont with a little bit of firewood, it moves. And so you see these isolated, it's here, and next thing you know, it shows up far away. It didn't fly there, that got moved. And so because of that dynamic, Representative Bach, it's not surprising that it would move the way it does. That's how it moves, and we've seen it elsewhere. It's really kind of surprising that I think we've actually been luckier than many, and maybe it's not all luck that this approach is working, that where people are pretty vigilant, pretty on top of it. We've done a good job with information, I think. So I think the surprise would be that it hasn't gone even farther and done more damage.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is John O'Brien. John?
Hi, Sam and Michael. Just
Morning.
for our viewers at home, and because it's part of the forest economy, could you give us a tutorial on toilet paper? I'm just interested in, everything from the mills, like where it comes from and what happened to the supply chain, because like Ingrid Seacrest from the Vermont retailer said, it was one of the first things to go away and will be one of the last to come back. And my sister-in-law was, trying to order it online from China, and it's, back order. So it's an interesting example of a forest economy product that's seemed to have a lot of problem with COVID.
Right. Well, it's paper, and it's a particular kind of paper. And so as Sam was getting at earlier, there's pulping facilities that take low-grade wood that turn it to pulp, and then turn that to paper. And there are different processes and different approaches for different grades and uses of paper. Toilet paper is a very specific one. Sam, do you want to shed any further light on how that's where and how that's done? Where our toilet paper tends to be sourced from?
Well, I will do the best I can. I know that in the far eastern parts of Maine, there are a couple of mills that make tissue and towel paper, and that they have seen obviously strong demand. In terms of the entire supply chain of it, I don't know, because there isn't a lot of it made in our region. We're heavily based on that writing copier paper and packaging paper. So there's not a lot of, I can't provide a lot of insight into the cause and effect. Probably not much more than what you know in the media. I think just generally a concern of shortage led people early on. I mean, I think this, the media was reporting shortages, I think weeks before the State House closed, that we were hearing about this idea that it was going to be a shortage. But I don't know, our major supermarket chains and things, where it's supplied from, which brand names are packaged out of which mills, and any direct connection through the forest economy supply chain that we're all so familiar with here. But I do know that there are some mills in Maine that have invested in it in the tissue and towel production, but not a lot of. I can't give you a good clear example of the supply chain back through. I think generally a lot of the issue, what I can speak to is that some of the other mills that are creating paper products that are in high demand, the medical supplies, for example, there aren't massive stockpiles. Our economy is built a lot on just-in-time delivery of many things, and there are not a lot of just giant stockpiles of products in general in our economic model. I'm not an economist, but that's what I've seen. People don't have any more inventory in place than they need to, and what they predict that they can typically move through and things like that. And when this all happened, I think it caught an awful lot of our economy and society short, and it's having quite an effect. And I don't expect that the cause and effect of this are different than other things that we've seen happen, other than toilet paper is something people don't want to run out of. And,
Sam?
Yes, sir.
Is something like tissue, or even like N95 masks, must have some sort of paper in them, I would suspect. Is it hard for these big mills to pivot to, if you made brown paper, to go to tissue all of a sudden? Is that just an impossibility?
It's the mills in Maine that have converted over to making the brown paper versus the newsprint magazine catalog paper. Those are multi-$100-million investments that take years. So it's statewide news in Maine when the Skowhegan paper mill #3 machine is back up and running. I mean, it's the state, they're that big a capacity. It's newsworthy. So there's a handful of paper machines in the region, physically located here, and they're an enormous logistical mechanical challenge to change over.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Terry Norris, and then Vicky, and then John Bartholomew.
Good morning, Sam and Michael. Last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a call from a reporter for the Addison Independent, and he wanted to know pretty much everything about the tree warden bill. And my brain was a little mushy because I couldn't remember if it was still on the table or not. I told him I thought there was so much controversy that we probably wouldn't make it work. And at the time, we were going to work on just COVID-19 bills, and I didn't think that was going to surface again, but I guess it's possible that it could. But he really wanted to know if it didn't pass this year, whether you were going to bring it up next year. And I told him I thought it was important enough for forest parks and recreation that you weren't going to just let it die a slow death. You would probably bring it back next session if it didn't, see the light of day this year. I believe he lived in Ferrisburg, so he had quite a lot of information about, the guys, and I think he kind of wanted to know if we brought this bill up because of that process, but I told him I thought there was something that you really wanted to see happen anyway. But so I thought it was interesting. I didn't either. We don't get the paper anymore, or I'm not sure. I didn't see the article that he wrote, but I told him try not to make me look like a fool.
So Terry,
Yeah.
I'll interject here before Michael speaks, but the tree warden bill is actually in play. It's on the calendar for second reading, where it's been there for the last month or month and a half. So it is something that I think there are those who would like to pass it. So I wouldn't make any promises one way or the other as to what happens with it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said. I just, I knew we worked on it a lot, but I just couldn't remember where it was, and I couldn't find it in our calendar. So I just kind of ad-libbed.
It's on their second reading. Go
Yes,
ahead, Michael.
I was just going to note, you guys, to give me another opportunity to thank you actually for sticking with us. You guys passed out of committee a heavily modified version, not as introduced, that even had the support of VLCT. So we were thrilled, quite happy. And I'm glad to hear the chair confirm that it's in the queue when we get to some sort of normalcy and you get to it, to try to move that on. And it's still a priority for us. Very happy with the progress that's been made, because as you say, as you wondered, it's a priority for us for a lot of reasons. And the Ferrisburg case was one of those that kind of made it real that we got to deal with this. There's too many conflicts and too much confusion for these conflicting statutes that go way back into the early part of the last century. So for all those reasons, we think it's important to move it ahead. And what you guys passed is very good. And we're hopeful that it's going to find its way, not knowing how this all works at this point. But the plan was to go to the floor and try to make it work and then get over to the Senate.
Good.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, next up is Vicky Strong. Vicky?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. And
Morning.
thank you, Michael and Sam. I get all excited about the updates you give us. My whole house is made of wood, and my ceiling right here is made out of antique silo boards. So my husband and I have a deep appreciation for wood, and it's fun to hear how adaptable the wood industry is in Vermont, forestry industry, and to hear about paper products, particularly. John O'Brien, did you not see that Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood episode about wood? I mean, about making toilet paper out of wood products. That was good. But anyway, just to hear like even tongue depressors are, obviously needed. And could you just tell us a little bit about, sometimes we take these wood products for granted and think they fall out of the sky. So tongue depressors and toothpicks and baseball bats, what kind of innovative wood products are being made in Vermont? Like, are these being made in Vermont, these tongue depressors? I wasn't sure when you said that.
I don't know about wood from Vermont. Likely is being used where they're being made. I think that was the point Sam was making. Not so
Okay.
much that we have a tongue depressor plant here, but it's true. It's just that there is an astonishing diversity and amount of wood used by all of us every day, well beyond what we sort of can imagine immediately. And basically everything that's currently made out of plastic either once was or could be made from wood. And we would suggest probably ought to be. And it's renewable, it's local, and we can keep the money here. It's not made from dead dinosaurs. And it contributes to forests being kept as forests and all the benefits that we get from them. So that's our big story here. And I mean, I'll happily dig up some document that can show you the range of products. It'll blow your mind what is made from wood. And now what's really cool is the new things that are being developed with what's called nanocellulose, the constituent components of wood, just like when they're ground up and chemically altered in a pulping process to turn wood into paper. That sort of the constituent products of that build wood can be used to make all kinds of new products that are being developed. Things like it's wood is being used in food products now, in brownie recipes. There's constituent parts of wood being used as an additive to concrete. There's this nanocellulosic technology spans from construction to food and all kinds of things, which we've heard about mills being able to, what's that word, Sam, they use, like piggybacking, or when you kind of have a current facility that's made for pulp, you can actually add on to it in a new way, relatively simply, to have a whole nother output of a product line that is needed by society. So that's encouraging to us that there's these emerging products and demand for such products that contribute. They're climate smart, they're safer, they're cheaper, can be made here. There's all these reasons why it's a winning concept, and that's something we want to push for more. There's some research and development at the federal level at certain universities, and it's starting slowly to creep into actual use, which we think is exciting as well, Representative Strong. And maybe I've seen a couple of papers published that kind of describe the long history of use of wood, the variety of products that we use it for, and now this diversification of new products and new technologies using components of wood, lignin, cellulose, et cetera, for this wild, really exciting array of new products. Anything you'd add, Sam?
Just really briefly, first, the tongue depressors are made in Maine from white birch. And I think, was it popsicle sticks and things like that are white birch products too, I believe. I don't know if Mike can confirm that.
Yeah, beech and birch have been used both. We had a Scrabble tile factory here in Vermont for some time, largely using beech wood, I believe, and some birch. Those kind of specialty products have gone, but they could come back.
And I would say that back to the beginning of the pandemic, the 24 hours from when the stay-at-home orders were issued to when the guidance came out from ACCD clarifying that the forest economy was, though it was not explicitly named in the essential business list, and then it was in the clarifying guidance. The phone calls that Commissioner Snyder and I received, the text messages, the emails of things that people were doing up your way, Representative Strong, the North Country Hospital. That was one of the first phone calls we got, was the sawmill owner that said the Canadian mills can't bring wood chips down here, and we're the secondary supplier, and we have to we're being told this, we're under the impression we can't operate our sawmill. We're putting the wood chips in to heat the North Country Hospital. Again, like I talked about the paper mill producing those things. It was a 24-hour childbirth process where the outcome when the guidance came out was clear and helpful to those businesses that could stay running. But we learned an awful lot. It was incredibly informative. The interdependency, the connectivity between the businesses in our state, the products they're producing was really impressive. And we need more of them here, as the commissioner said.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say that's exciting, and I really appreciated everything you guys are doing and how much wood products are somewhat behind the scenes and yet so vital. And one vital thing I need is a comfortable kitchen chair. I'm just standing here today because my wooden kitchen chair really is too uncomfortable. So let's design a good kitchen chair. But anyway, thank
Nice.
you.
Thank you.
Get right on that. Yeah, I actually heard, I've heard about this before, but I heard about it more recently, probably within the last month on VPR or NPR, about the fact that they're thinking about building skyscrapers out of wood again. So, yeah.
It's not just thinking, Madam Chair, I'm glad you raised it. It's happening. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in Australia. It's starting to happen here. There's a couple of big famous facilities in the Northwest. The federal government is investing. This is the concept of using what's known broadly as mass timbers, or cross-laminated timbers as one particular application of the mass timber concept, which is basically creating massive plywood, if you will, that is made by using small, like 2x4s or dimensional lumber, laminated, glued up crossways to make huge panels. These are structurally sound. They pass seismic code. They have actually surprisingly, astonishingly positive fire resistance. And 30-story buildings can be built from these panels as just the structure. And then there are many designs that are incorporating, that doesn't include all the other uses, the traditional uses of wood and flooring and millwork and trim, et cetera. And that's exciting. The idea that we're returning to worldwide to building with wood again after fears of fire and some real fires that, because of the different kind of construction that was dangerous. This is a whole new application. Architects are starting to come on board, and you're seeing facilities being built to create cross-laminated timbers. And that's been discussed here. It's not likely a really short-term viable opportunity for us. It requires a production softwood milling capacity that we don't have. We have the resource, but we don't necessarily have the facilities. We could contribute to it, and we're excited by the prospects, and everybody should be. And as an alternative to steel and concrete, it's cheaper. It's way more climate smart, directly and indirectly. And so there's so many good things about it that society really needs to be demanding it, asking for it. And one of the great things on top of all of that is they create nicer buildings that are just better to be in. And everyone seems to be confirming that.
Yeah. All right. I've got John Bartholomew's hand up, and John O'Brien and then Sharon. So John.
We're bouncing all over the place, and now I actually have a new question based on what you're just saying about using these materials for construction, the wood. What about termites? That it wasn't my question. My first question. That's my second question.
Termites are amazing if you think about it.
They are, but so I mean,
we don't want them.
You don't want to have a skyscraper with its foundation eaten away.
Right. Well, the foundations wouldn't be. These buildings are not entirely made out of wood. They're predominantly made out of wood, and I think in those places where termites really are an actual, threat, there's all kinds of there are mitigating strategies that include traditional foundations and basements, et cetera. and treatment. But
Because I hear people in Mexico who, if they've got big cabinets, they have to move them from time to time just so the termites don't eat the furniture. And
yeah,
anyway, the main question I wanted to ask was going back to the emerald ash borer, and you mentioned some resistance in some individuals. Is that? Can you say more about that? Is that in individuals within a group of the same species, or are we talking resistance varying among different species of tree, or just say a little bit more about natural resistance?
Yeah, this is the idea of a genetic heritable resistance in a population of trees. So this tends to be within a species. Now in Vermont, we have a handful of species of ash. All are vulnerable to the emerald ash borer. Predominantly, we have in the woods white ash. In certain sites, enriched seepage sites, for example, with brown ash or sometimes called black ash. That's the basket ash that traditional pack baskets would be made from. We also have an abundance of green ash species in particularly riparian or wetland areas, and that's the species most commonly planted in street tree plantings. So we have a handful of species, and within a species, a population of any species, there is, trees are among the most genetically diverse organisms on the planet. If you think about that, they have to be. They can't move around and change environments. They live for several hundred years in one place. So they have to have that plasticity, if you will, that comes from genetic variation. Included in that genetic variation in white ash, evidently, in certain places where, like in Michigan, where the EAB first emerged, in the aftermath forest, is after the infestation and devastation, there remained what have been deemed lingering ash, living ash that seemed to survive it. That connotes at least the possibility of heritable resistance, that the genetic level that can be bred out and crossbred back and may be able to, so through a breeding program and a nursery program, we could rebuild America's ash forests with compounding this heritable genetic resistance. So that's the idea. It tends to be within a species, Representative Bartholomew, and it has been, there are early indications of this genetic resistance that we're trying to capitalize on.
So then that would raise the other question. A lot of towns are talking about how evidently they're much more difficult to bring down once they're dead.
Right.
And some towns are saying, well, we should just go on our right ways and clear them all out before they get sick. But if some of them are going to survive, that approach doesn't make sense.
Right. And that's why our guidance at the department to foresters and managers and landowners is to basically says, yeah, if you've got ash trees that are are high risk for damage to people or property, that's a whole nother category to be analyzed and mitigated. Say street trees, and that's why communities are thinking this way, because it's true, once infested, they become exceptionally brittle and unpredictable and dangerous to take down. So that's worth paying attention to. But our guidance speaks to that and encourages thoughtful assessment and removal plans. But in the woods, where that sort of risk and hazard is less, our guidance is very much about doing what you can to keep ash on the landscape. So we would say things like silviculturally, if you have a woodlot and you're in current use, say, and you have a management plan that says in 2 years we're going to have a thinning or a regeneration harvest, and you were planning to take some trees, you might maybe think about taking some of the ash trees that are approaching their economic maturity, if not their biologic maturity, take those maybe a little earlier. If you've invested in managing this, the economic return is important to you, by all means, take some of that medium-sized ash, but don't take all of it. We would ask you to keep some ash in every diameter class, and in particular, think about what we can do silviculturally to open the canopy, change light and moisture conditions on the ground in a way that stimulates or provides an opportunity for new ash seedlings to emerge for the future. And maybe they're less appetizing to the insect, and they buy us some time as well. So we're simply saying salvaging the value of your ash makes sense to a landowner where it makes sense. Pre-salvaging all ash doesn't really make sense because it does fly in the face of this more hopeful concept of this possibility of genetic resistance. So we can't tell the phenotype or the outward expression of a tree tells us very little about the inside makeup of that tree. So you can't really say, we don't have a probe to plug in and say, this one's resistant. We need then to sort of keep our options open. And that's why the guidance would say, take some, leave some, keep some in each diameter class or size class. And let's try to hold on to ash. And in part to capitalize on this very hopeful, again, possibility of heritable resistance that can last for the long term.
Okay. Thanks. John, did you have anything else? Okay. All right, John O'Brien and then Sharon. John?
Last week, Ellen Kaler spoke. We were talking about food supply chain, and probably you were on, Michael, and she brought up the issue of bleach was deemed essential, but then jugs were not. And so there was this bottleneck there. So I was wondering if you had any examples in the forest economy where those sort of bottlenecks were occurring, where something was deemed essential, but some other essential piece was stopped in production. And
Well,
the other question to follow up on that was, is there anything this committee can do, whether it's a letter or COVID legislation, to help out the forest economy?
Thank you. Let's get back to that one importantly. And the first one, I think what comes to mind, Sam, maybe you can help explain this even better, is right off when we had this supply chain that the early side was essential, but other parts weren't. So you've got a mill that spans all of that. They're supposed to make sawdust, which is essential, but you can't make sawdust without making some boards that isn't essential. And so we had that bottleneck right there. Sam, can you put a little color on that? A little more detail?
Yeah, I think that had been, I think now, likely now with the governor's changes in the executive order is relaxing some, but you put that round log into the mill and there's bark mulch coming off it, there's slabs, there's the sawdust, there's different grades of boards, and all those products going to a different outcome, and its essentialness being designated somewhere along there. And so we had mill owners that said, do I stack up all this lumber that needs to be graded and dried because it's not essential? Am I not allowed to have those employees in the mill? And how long do I, put that wood at risk for without further processing and things like that? So it has those kind of bottlenecks have occurred. In your lower grades, it's more traditional. All the product goes into one thing, but the higher grade, think of that round log going in, entering a mill, and all the different products that come out of that are made from that one log. And it is to some extent perishable. Some of those products, or without additional processing and things like that, their value becomes at risk. So those are the first things that come to mind in that realm.
Right. To the second question, thank you for that. Really appreciate it. What should be done? What can you do? What can we do together? I think the short answer there is please stay tuned. We're still sorting this out. What we've done, in addition to taking stock and making all this input and then trying to compile resources and information and guidance to people, whether they're forest landowners or a sawmill and everybody in between, we've been also examining what we control and what we could do to be flexible, creative, innovative, to create, just to make some allowances for how strange and difficult things are right now. For example, so what I mean by that is under my authority as commissioner without needing legislative or statutory change. So current use, just 2 million acres, almost 16,000 landowners enrolled in the forest land category alone, with requirements for plan updates, inspections, activity, and reporting on that activity. And we have said, okay, the April 1st deadline for forest management plans is a really big deal. Couple thousand of those every year coming through with 13 county foresters to handle it. In a good year, it's a bottleneck. Right now, people couldn't get to them. If you don't get your plan in on April 1st, your update, you get removed from the program. you're back to ad valorem taxation. You can't come back in for 5 years, right? It's a big deal. So I have the authority to grant extensions to that April. I can't change the deadline. That's up to you guys. That's in statute. But I do have the authority to grant extensions. And we put out a blanket statement noting that we're going to ease up on our requirements for what constitutes a good excuse for an extension. And we're basically just allowing people through accident, mistake, misfortune, which is in the statutes, related to these deadlines. We could give that just that blanket extension, made it very simple for people to do that. We're also asking county foresters to change the way they're operating, and we're trying to get within 3 days amendments to forest management plans approved. Very rapid approval with the consulting licensed forester to get things moving out there. Things like that. That's what we've been trying to do. Looking at state lands that we manage. What can we do for the forest economy by putting people to work, by prioritizing some timber sales and forest management, habitat improvement work, to have a pipeline of projects to put people back to work. We're very excited about thinking about investing in kind of a CCC inspired response from the Depression era to a public works program to invest in public lands in a way that puts relatively small-time contractors, family operators, whether they're loggers, excavators, et cetera, to work on public lands doing timber stand improvement for the long-term quality of our timber resources, to do access improvements for recreational access and forest management access, water quality upgrades, invasive species control, emerald ash borer mitigation and campgrounds for that risk mitigation, that with some maybe federal stimulus money or otherwise, we could focus it on investing in public lands with the valuable point of putting contractors to work in the short term as a recovery, an economic recovery, but with the long-term benefit of investing in public lands to support the recreation and forest economy of the state over the long term. And so we're thinking about what can we do within our given authority, but also looking forward to, we might need to come to you to talk about statutory changes in current use over the coming year. I think Act 250 now becomes even more important to think about these changes that we've discussed with you for the forest industry and the forest economy, and how Act 250 goes about permitting facilities that add value in the forest side. I don't think either Sam or I would come and say, here, do this now, but I think that's what we're looking to do. I think there will be opportunities that we could work together for policy change that provide some nimbleness and a response, looking at it as like the immediate response, the medium-term response, and then the longer-term recovery. I do think we'll be eager to come visit with you guys when you come up for air, and can really visit some policy change that's COVID related as a response to changing the way we do things. I think we're all learning a lot of lessons. Sam hinted at a couple of these about how we're built for the just in time, and there's not this, we're relying too much on people who don't think like us from somewhere else, I guess. The globalization has been difficult. So I think this is a time for us to take stock and come forward with maybe some shifts. I would just say, I don't think there's any emergency request right now, but stay tuned. I think we probably will be coming up with some things. We're also just trying to stay out of your hair right now, given that you're focused on figuring out how to function, focused on COVID response and the sort of big bill, budget kind of stuff that you have to get through now, but we'll be ready to engage. Sam, would you add anything to that?
Only to hammer home the point of, again, the vulnerability that we have talked about together with you so many times of relying on fewer and fewer, larger and more distant businesses that add value to our forest product. The vulnerability is there. Each time we lose the last mill, the last mill that adds value to a certain species, that reverberates all the way back through to the forest land itself and puts that at risk. And so that would be to hammer home that point that
yes,
we're
it
seeing.
Really. Go, Sam. Sorry.
We're just seeing that again with the mill. We talked about it with the Rutland plywood and the white birch. We saw the value of the white birch drop by 40% in the southern 4 counties. That was the, quote unquote, last mill in Vermont that added value to white birch, and it devalued the balance sheet of the forest economically. And not knowing what's going to happen to this pine mill in Jay, Maine, 2 states away, is going to impact forest management in Vermont in a huge way. And we're very reliant on a few corporate shareholders sitting around the table and the decisions they make for what they invest in for facilities and export and trade policy, that's going to shape the family land ownership of in the future of these forests, how they make their economic decisions. So it would take at least 10 pellet mills scattered around Vermont to make up the wood that one pulp mill buys in Maine. We need to create an atmosphere where people are have confidence in investing in those things. And we've talked about that a lot with you, and we welcome the opportunity to do it more. So
this idea of rebuilding our forest economy, our energy economy, here locally in Vermont, to use what we have and what others have to add value, keep forests. We've been talking about it, and I just think what Sam and I are saying here now is that this circumstance we find ourselves in only underscores the importance and the urgency of doing it. We'd be better off if our planet, the role of wood in our planet and human civilization is epic. It's okay. And it's a long history that shows that the only time really anything changes is when you get scarcity. And that's a problem. We need to act before we lose our forests, for example, for productive use. And what we've also learned is that pretty much everything is better the closer the wood is used to where it grew. So Sam coined this phrase several years ago, made the point that the way we've been reliant on Maine's pulp mills as a foundation for our forest economy is tantamount to us loading all of our sap into tankers, trucking it to Maine, and letting them add value in syrup and other maple products. No right-thinking Vermonter would ever do that. Yet that is exactly what we do and continue to do with the forest economy. And we need to change that, right? We have the chance. This is underscoring it.
Thanks, Michael and Sam. Sharon's hand is up, and I'm kind of looking at the time. I know we have Jane Clifford on board here, but I want to make sure you get what you need to say in. Sharon, why don't you go ahead and ask your.
Thank you. Well, I guess my first point is that we're talking about supply chain issues. Globally, there is a shortage of sand that is the right kind of sand for making concrete. And I think we're going to see that come into play and impact us in our lifetime. It's already a topic of conversation in some circles. So I'm really glad to hear that wood is an option for building taller buildings than we've seen lately. But I guess to jump off of also John O'Brien's last question, and one of the last things you said, Michael, was that you quoted Sam, talking about how crazy it is that we send this raw product out of state to become value added. What does Maine have that allows them to do that we haven't been able to do, that we haven't been able to make it work and keep it happening here? Because I know we used to have more mills here.
Yes, we had even in my time as a forester in the state, it's amazing how many mills that I used to send wood to that no longer exist. These would be sawmills, hardwood mills in particular that I worked with. And so we've had that, and we've lost a lot of that. But what we've never really had in this state was the sort of paper industrial ownership and paper manufacturing that Maine has had. It's never been here in Vermont. And Maine has it because it's massive. It's much bigger, and it's historical. And so they've had close access, ready access to industrial lands and industrial investment in those manufacturing facilities. It just never happened here. And I think that's really the big piece. And because of that history and that local importance, like Sam says, it's statewide news when the number 3 machine goes online or off. That's part of the culture. that I believe their policies and their sort of public response and understanding is different than ours here. Our approach, I mean, we've said this before, whether it's locally, statewide through Act 250, but permitting and regulation of these facilities, they're treated just like a box store. And they're not a box store. We've tried to say they have this conservation effect, a sawmill. And it's for every few thousand feet of wood that comes through, there's several acres being kept as forest. And we need to embrace that and celebrate that. And that's what they have more of that in Maine. I guess to answer your question is they have that history, they have the culture, and it's supported. And it's just not here. And we need to change that.
And so their paper mill industry has led to a lot of pretty good sized clear cuts and monocropping kind of trees, which is probably not something we want here.
Right.
Monocrops are vulnerable. As you know, you are who you are. That's ecologically disastrous and not able to weather certain storms. But thank you.
And they've struggled with that. And I think that's another reason is that we still have a chance to get it right here. We have high quality, high value forests, engaged ownership of landowners, largely privately owned family forests. We still have a chance to get it right. But there are many threats to this. Conversion to non-forest, exurbanization and development, just poor thinking. We got to make it valuable. People will make the choices right for themselves when it makes sense, and we need to make it possible for it to make sense, because we still have a chance. We do. And it doesn't have to be industrial strength, industrial size clear cutting. And even in Maine, that's really not the case anymore. I've been on some fantastic tours on industrial ownerships where modern concepts in ecological forestry are being applied. And so it doesn't have to be that way. And even there, it's changing for the better.
Thank you.
I would jump in and say that economies of scale, that mill in Jay, for example, I'm doing really quick math off the top of my head, but I think they consume annually roughly about 2 times what the state of Vermont harvests annually, that one mill in low grade wood. We have, the state of Vermont processes our sawmill capacity. The last number I have, most current number I have is 98 million board feet a year is our sawmill capacity in Vermont, all our scattered mills. You go across the border, all those trucks that you see driving up the interstate on your way home, there are individual mills in Quebec, right on our border, that process 150 million board feet annually under one roof at one facility, that are positioned to utilize our natural resource and raw materials. Their government has made favorable policy changes that keep those mills, whether it's energy costs, education of the workforce, transportation networks,
Healthcare.
Pardon?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Yes, I hear that's important. So they've made an intentional investment in those facilities. And as the commissioner said, we grow all this high quality wood here. It's being put on trucks and hauled somewhere because it's valuable. People need it. People are using it every day in every aspect of their life. And our rural economy could benefit if we did more things to stop those trucks and unload them and add value to those products at least once before they left the state in some way. But we're not low cost producers of anything in Vermont. We heard Mateo Kaler say that not long before the pandemic in the Working Lands Day at the State House. We're not low cost producers of anything in Vermont. So wherever we can help mitigate that in different ways in an environmentally and socially responsible way, we're going to be better for it. I think there's low hanging fruit. We've talked about this a lot, and I think this is a whole new light to look at these things under.
Sam, did you say that that the capacity for Vermont's mills at this point is 98 million board feet per year?
I believe our mill capacity, that is mills over 1 million board feet annually in production. Cumulatively, they process 90 a year.
Okay.
That's essentially a mill that's in business every day. A going commercial enterprise, if you will.
Yeah, they can do 1 million board feet.
Well, a million, that when I account for that number, that's starting at that threshold and up. Mills that produce process 1 million board feet a year and up to that would be the low end of the accounting threshold.
Right, right. So but that doesn't take into consideration some of the smaller guys. That
That's
98 million total.
Correct.
Okay.
Sort of
Yeah.
a cutoff at which it's a commercial enterprise, roughly. I
Yeah.
wouldn't discount anybody under that or intent at all. So.
Okay, great. All right. I think we need to kind of wrap this up because we do have Jane and we only have until 11:30. So is there anything else you, Michael, or Sam would like to add at this point? We really, really appreciate this update and staying in touch with you because we know how important our forests are to the state of Vermont.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and all of you for the time. I think we can leave it at that for now, knowing that we're counting on visiting with you again. In the meantime, we'll keep at it. We're happy to come back when you're ready for an update or status report as things move. And to Representative O'Brien's question, we'll be working on some things that might make sense to discuss with you about what can be done together, policy-wise or otherwise, to respond appropriately in the best way. We'll keep at that and alert you when we think we might have something to share, and when you're ready, let us know, and we'll look forward to getting together again. Does that work for you, Sam?
Yes, thank you all. It's been a good conversation. Thanks to Jane for patience. And
yes, thank you all. Stay well.
See you all.
Guys, so much. We really appreciate everything you do.
Hi, Jane.
All right. Thank you so much. We're going to turn our attention to the situation with dairy farms. We know it's pretty dire, and this may also be a segue if we have time for me to talk a little bit about something that's been going on in the Senate in terms of a response. But we want to welcome Jane Clifford here to talk a little bit about this, and I think she has her hat on as an actual farmer herself to let us know what's happening there. So welcome, Jane. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you, Representative Partridge, and thanks to the committee for having me. Yes, today my hat is dairy producer, and I'll just give you a 30-second overview for some of you who don't know. My husband and I operate a dairy farm in Starksboro, Vermont. It was the first farm in Starksboro back in 1793. And we are the last dairy farm in Starksboro now. We crop, we own 500 acres and we milk, we're an MFO and we milk 3 times a day. My husband and I have been doing this, just let's say, for over 40 years. He is the 8th generation on the farm. So we've been at this a while. The farm has been in operation for a while. I just wanted to kind of give you the perspective from a dairy producer. I know you've heard from lots and lots of people about the dairy industry, about the challenges, about dumping milk, about lack of milk on the grocery store shelves. And I thought it would be nice maybe to hear from the producer side of it as to what is happening. And it is challenging. There is no doubt about it. It's challenging. But as I would say, it is, and to anyone, it is challenging for anyone right now in our county, in our state, in our country, and in the world. So we don't think we are, any more challenged than anyone else. We're all in this together. You've heard that dairy co-ops are asking their producers to produce less milk because, overnight a switch was hit and 35 to 40% of dairy products weren't needed anymore. There was no restaurants. There was no colleges. There were no schools. There was, limited need for that product. So overnight, it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And I think the other challenge with that was the supply and the storage capacity. I think that's the other piece. You know, dairy is a very perishable product. You know, within less than 48 hours, it leaves my farm and is in either on a store shelf or made into something else. Otherwise, as you saw, it has to be disposed of. So I think many people are looking at this and saying, oh, I can't do it. I can't reduce, I can't do that. And I think, you know, one of the things about the dairy industry is there are a lot of things that we can't control. So we have to be flexible. We have to be nimble. And I know that doesn't sound like, you know, the dairy industry is, but it is. Weather, we can't control weather. So every year when we plant crops or we try to spread manure or we harvest crops, you know, we are at the mercy of the weather. So with this management approach and reducing milk, you know, we've looked at it on our operation, and we actually have management tools in place, and we're feeding our animals to produce higher components rather than for volume. We are transitioning. I don't like the word culling. You know, culling cows just has a negative connotation. Our cows are transitioning either to another home or another occupation. We're drying off animals earlier. So we actually, within the last, I would say, month, we have reached our reduction goal for our co-op, doing those management, utilizing those management tools. I know other farms, you know, are doing other things. We actually milk 3 times a day. We were considering, you know, if we had to, we would milk 2 times a day, which would again reduce the volume. So we are very confident that we will meet the volume that our co-op is looking for us to do, which it's a responsibility that I see as a producer. If there's too much product out there, which we've been talking about for years, how do we get a better handle on the amount of product out there? I think it's my responsibility as a producer to work to make sure that there isn't an over excess. If there's no home for a product, why do you want to produce it? You know, that's always been our philosophy. You know, we work really hard to produce a very high quality product. Cow comfort is a big part of how we manage our operation. You know, so I think it's important as a producer of something to be responsible and make sure whatever I'm producing, there's a home for it, and not just go willy-nilly and make as much as I want just because I want to. I know there are a lot of producers that have a different approach, but that's been our philosophy. So I think that's an important piece going forward. Again, this is not an easy thing for farmers to do, but it is doable, and it's all about management, and it's all about knowing your animals, knowing your business. And please stop me if you have any questions.
Jane, I actually, you may have said it, but I missed it. You ship to Agrimart, and so.
No, we ship to DFA.
Okay, so were you also then cut back to 85%?
Yes. So we were, the letter came, and it wasn't, you know, we had late last fall, our co-op DFA had looked at doing a program in the spring, that because in the spring, there's usually an excess of milk. So back then there was a discussion on, let's talk about not producing as much milk during the spring flush, as it's called. So the conversation had been going on, and I think, you know, being a member of the Vermont Milk Commission, you know, for the last couple of years, it was a big conversation there that how do we get a handle on supply? You know, how do we create a market that is much more beneficial for the producer because they're producing a product that has a home rather than not. So yes, and there are other co-ops that have taken a different approach. Maybe it was a lesser amount of reduction, but on the other side, there was a greater penalty for overproduction. You know, so I think every co-op is doing what they feel fits the needs of their producers and their business model. So I think that's the other side of this.
Yeah, thanks. Vicky's up. So Vicky, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Jane, I'm so impressed. 8th generation on your farm. That's pretty outstanding. My goodness. So you're doing good things there. And we have been talking about culling cows and such, and I like the idea of transitioning that you mentioned. Could you elaborate on that a bit more for us? And in transitioning, do you even change breeds of cows on your farm? Like, well, maybe cream is better. Let's do Jerseys. Tell us a little more about the transitioning idea instead of, quote, culling.
Culling. So when I use the word transitioning, the cow is leaving our herd, you know, and sometimes it's being bought for beef and sometimes it's being bought for a dairy replacement for another herd. But it's, you know, to me, culling is, you're taking an animal and it sounds like you're disposing of it because it has no value. But the reality is it still has value. You know, for us, it might not fit our herd at the time. So we're moving it to either it's going to an auction barn for either beef or transition, or it's going to a slaughter facility. You know, so it's moving on to something else. The other point you bring up is the a different breed. You know, we're Holstein. It's always been black and white cows. But we do have, what we have been doing is for a lot of our heifers, when we breed them the first time, we will breed them to an Angus. Because a lot of times, especially when the beef market was high, that if it's a bull calf, that cross between the Angus and the Holstein makes a really nice bull calf, then to create a nice beef animal. So, you know, that's another option that we have looked at on our farm to do that.
Thanks, Jane. You know, Bobby Starr and I have been talking, I mean, we've been pretty much talking through this whole thing, but one of the things that we did talk about was transitioning farms to other ways of making money. And that was one of the things that we talked about, was the possibility of breeding dairy cows to more of a carcass animal, so that they could, you know, so bull calves could be, instead of being bob calves and basically, you know, worthless, that they could potentially be part of an industry that we develop more and more going forward in the state of Vermont.
Yes, and I think, and again, I think when we're all running our dairy businesses, we're looking at how do we manage our risk, and what are the options in managing our risk, and I think that you know, that is one part of it. I think when we look at transitioning, I hear that word a lot. And as I said, we've been around for a long time. And for us and for where we are at in our town in Starksboro, a transitioning piece would be rather difficult to totally change the model that we have. You know, what we do is look at other options to manage the risk. One of the pieces on our farm is we don't buy a lot of equipment. You know, we contract out most of our manure spreading. You know, that's all contracted out. We do plant our own corn, but we don't do any of the cropping. Again, we contract that out because the reality of owning a large piece of equipment that sits there for 10 months out of the year isn't cost effective, you know, for us. You know, so those are the types of things that we look at. And I think because we have been through a lot of different things over the years, efficiency is another piece, but not at the expense of either our animals or our employees. Those are our two biggest assets in how we manage our business. We have between 7 and 8 full and part-time employees, and half of them are former farmers that sold their animals but could never leave farming. And so we've been very, very fortunate of having a really great group of people who work for us and support our efforts. So I know there's been a lot of talk of relationship farms, and a lot of times, you know, when you look at a commodity product, it's a commodity product. But I guess I would say to you, a relationship farm to me is a community farm. Our dairy farms in this state, if you look at who's on the fire department, who's on the EMS, you know, who serves on the school board, you know, who is the first one that is volunteers for something. You know, the dairy farms in our communities are part of the fabric of the community. So I think that sometimes, you know, they just produce conventional milk and it gets shipped, and so there's no direct access with the consumer. But I would say we are the foundation of the rural economy, so that relationship is there, and it's very strong. And I think if you look at farms across the country, that rural economy, that rural sense of who is there, the farmer's there 24/7.
Right.
Managing his animals, managing the land. And I think, you know, it's amazing the number of people that drive by. Our farm is right on Route 116 in Starksboro, Vermont. So even now, we have to keep them at bay, but the people that just drive by or stop on the roadside and, you know, take pictures of the animals or the fields, or, you know, the number of turkey hunters that we've had, you know, for the last week, just utilizing the property we have. So I think that sometimes gets lost in those of us who make, you know, conventional milk. So I just wanted to kind of put a little plug in there for.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Dairy farmers and dairy farm families are frequently those very people who are a big part of a community. Rodney has his hand up, and I'd like to call on him. Rodney?
Yeah. Jane, it seems like, you know, naturally you've been in a family farms for many generations, and you probably have a pretty good equity built up in your operation. But do you really believe that a lot of these farms are going to be able to survive on $14, $12 milk that's coming along, that don't have a big equity or have a lot of debt?
You know,
you might be able to survive it a lot longer than some other farms. And you think that, do you see a lot of farms going out?
You know, Rodney, that's a big issue. And some of that has been the last 4 years, we in the dairy industry have not been able to put away a lot of money because we're using it for operating on a regular basis. And I think that going forward, the farms that don't have the equity or don't have the ability to manage will be challenged. And I do worry about that. I think that we have to look at how we go forward within the industry and how we're not going to change pricing. You know, let's be honest, the pricing system in the United States right now for milk has been in place for years. And we all would love to change how it's priced, but that's not going to happen. So I think we have to look at how do we support those producers that want to stay in the business and have a balance sheet that might be a little weak, but with the right management style could move forward. I'm an optimist, Rodney. Because our farm has gone through some challenges, and you know, we haven't always had a strong balance sheet. Just because, you know, the farm's been in the family for a number of years, there's been some major challenges, and we've had to look at some things and made some changes.
Well, yeah, and you know, my farm's gone through a lot of those challenges as well, and I understand all that. I'm really concerned for the younger farmers that are, you know, don't have the equity because they're trying to get going, and you know, this milk price. And yes, it's very simple to say we can't control the price, but we don't try. We don't try to fight that system hard enough to make a change. And we're very, very quick to say, well, we can't do anything about it. And I know it would be quite a battle to change it, but you know, these younger farmers, I'm scared, are not going to be able to survive this.
Well, I think you're right. I think I don't think we can change the pricing, but I think we can change the volume of milk that we as an industry make.
We can do that, and eventually that would change the price. But still, I think you know, when you start investing on predictions that you're going to get $18, $19 milk, and now all of a sudden you're 12 or 14.
Yeah.
You don't have the equity or the ability to borrow more, you know, you're going to be in a hard shape. And it's not, the prices ain't going to come back overnight.
No.
It's going to be a while. It's going to be a long while. So I think we're going to lose a lot of our younger farms that are trying to get into this, you know, and we're going to be back to the older generation that's eventually going to want to get out. And you know, the only thing I could say is I'm so glad my cows left last weekend. I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah. I think one of the pieces that I think is important that you know, there were the PPP, the payroll protection program. I encouraged as many people as I could to, as a producer, get in line for that. I know our farm was able to get through that program. I think it's an excellent program. And I think as a business person, and it's the same with the Lidl program that has just come available to agriculture. Again, there's an opportunity for an investment, the PPP program, using it for payroll, the opportunity to have that become a grant, that's a huge piece for a farm, you know, for that period of time. And the Lytle program also offers an opportunity at a very, very low interest rate with not a lot of, shall we say, back of the house for the producer. And so I really encourage all in the industry to look at both of those programs.
Yeah, so let me share my experience with the PPP program. We file our income tax as a partnership. And they say their response was, well, a partnership typically takes draws from the business and not paychecks. You don't qualify.
But then the other program was the PUA, which was, that one also came out, and that has, for the independent contractor or the logger or the dairy producer that is part of a partnership, there is an opportunity to apply to that program and get money too.
Yeah, I was denied that one too.
I would, if you were, then I would definitely question that.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. So this brings me to something that I've been talking with Bobby Starr about. Bobby, Senator Starr, who, as we all know, chairs the Senate Agriculture Committee, has been working on a bill that he presented. I wanted to be careful that we didn't, bring this out, talk about this too quickly, but they've been working on a bill that has to do with dairy assistance during this. And Mike O'Grady worked really hard on this with Bobby to come up with some ideas, some numbers. And Mike, would you just like to, and committee, this is on our website. Linda loaded it onto the page. And Mike, would you like to take a minute or two to go through this? I don't think it's too complicated. Be willing to do that?
Sure. So just to further preface, there was a dairy assistance program that was created in 2007, 2008, after some significant changes to the market pricing and a blizzard. This is based on that, but it is simplified. The 2007 assistance was based on a differential in price. This is not based on a price differential. This is based on basically what category of farm the milk producer might be in. So you'll see that there's section A that creates the assistance program. There's some definitions. I think you or the Senate committee needs to make some decisions about what scope you want this to apply to. Do you just want it to apply to dairy? Then you need to change the definitions. If you want it to apply to anyone that qualifies as a large farm, medium farm, or small farm, then these definitions work, but that's a decision for the committees about scope of this program. And then you'll see that on page 2, line 16, this section establishes a program to provide financial assistance to milk producers due to the loss of markets such as schools and restaurants caused by the COVID-19 public health emergency. The program shall provide assistance to a milk producer in the form of a direct payment based on the size of the farm operated by the milk producer. Assistance to milk producers operating large farms, medium farms, and certified small farms shall be based on the average number of cows maintained in each category of farm. The average number of cows shall be 1,000 cows for a large farm, 450 for medium, and 125 for certified small farms. Large farms and medium farms shall receive assistance of $50 per cow and certified small farms shall receive assistance at $100 per cow. Assistance to the small farms that are not certified is not based on a per cow average, because we would have difficulty calculating that. So applying that criteria in subdivision 2, the program shall award a direct payment to producers as follows. Large farms receive $50,000. Medium farms shall receive $22,500. Certified small farms shall receive $12,500. Small farms shall receive $5,000. The assistance is paid as a one-time award on or before July 1, 2020, and then the payment comes as a separate check direct to the milk producer and does not pass through a co-op or other milk handler. Section B is probably, actually, why don't I stop there and ask him if you have any questions?
Rodney, your hand is up. Rodney, you need to unmute yourself. Yep.
Yeah, I guess I forgot to put it down before.
That's okay.
I haven't, is this gotta be retroactive to when the pandemic, when the emergency was declared, or is this?
Well, that's a great question, and that kind of is related to my point at the beginning about the scope of the program. There were at the beginning of the year 644 dairy farms. There's probably less at this point. This is based on the 644 number. I think if you wanted it to apply retroactively to those farms that were in existence as of, say, January 1 or March 12th, you could do that. That's kind of what the issue with scope. For example, in the Senate committee, there's at least one member that wants it to be broader than just dairy. Wants it to be for poultry and potentially other production. And so that's a question. That's a question for you and the Senate committee on who you want it to apply to, how far back you want the assistance to go. And that is not specifically answered in this language.
Okay, so that's something we could discuss. The Senate has not passed this bill out of committee, right, Mike?
That's correct.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any other, oh, Sharon has her hand up. Sharon?
Thank you. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about how, if I were a small certified operation and it would only take me 5 cows to qualify as a medium, and I knew this was coming down, I'd go buy 5 cows. And I just think that we don't want to encourage the growth of herds right now. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but that's just like one spot where I feel like it's worth commenting. That's all.
I know from appearances, it looks like that would be an easy thing to do, but you would have to get a medium farm operating permit, and the requirements under the MFO rules for operation are more stringent than under the RAPs for certified small farms. So you might actually be doing economic damage to yourself rather than benefit.
Okay, so I know some farms that have already culled some cows, and if I know they culled, they have what is the cutoff to be medium farm? 200? You have to have 200.
200 to 699.
Okay, so this is a medium-sized operation, but they were at about 200. So they have offloaded I want to say 15 cows already, but they would still qualify as a medium farm with this.
Right. I think that depends on how you want. You could say a farm with a medium farm operation permit as of March 12th or as of January 1st. It really depends on how you want this to apply and whom you want it to apply to. I think the original concept was for it to help existing operating farms prop themselves up over the next 3 months.
Yep. Yep.
But at the same time, I see an argument for helping out those farms that were in existence from January to today that maybe needing to go out of business and need some assistance to cover past financing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I have John O'Brien, Terry Norris, and John Bartholomew on deck. John O'Brien?
Mike, if you run the numbers on this bill, what's the price tag and how do our colleagues in the Senate expect to pay for it? I wondered if they were thinking of redirecting, say, federal dollars, or would our Vermont revenues needed to be raised?
Well, if you're gonna base the calculation on 644 dairy farms and the breakdown of those farms by the numbers that are available, it's about $8.7 million. The COVID response fund, the 1.25 billion, allows for assistance for what they call second tier effects, which include providing business assistance to those industries that are harmed. I think this program would likely qualify under the existing 3 criteria for use of those federal funds. And so I think those monies would be probably the preferred way to fund this.
Okay, thank you. And so Terry, your hand is down. Did you want to ask a question?
It was kind of pretty much what John just asked. I was wondering if we were going to be able to get this money from the CARES Act or whether it was coming out of general fund, because I didn't see that as being a possibility. But I mean, I think it's a good idea. Hopefully we can make it work, because I mean, when we were farming back when they had the original original program, I think we received it, and it certainly does help.
Right, and I actually was on the Agriculture Committee at the time. I was not the chair at the time. David Zuckerman was, and Al Perry from Richford. Richford, really worked hard on this, and we ended up, I think, spending $13 million, as I recall. I might be wrong about that number, but it was, I would say, at least that, right, Mike?
Well, the initial appropriation was 3 million, and then there were some supplemental appropriations. I can't remember what the supplemental amount was.
Right. John, John Bartholomew, you had your hand up. Did you get your question answered?
Same question.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you scroll down to the end of the bill, if you pulled it up on your own computers, you can see what the cost is. Now, Mike, in my conversation with Bobby, he said something about this Section B, the loan buy down program, probably not being included in the bill ultimately. Do you know?
Sure. So the 2007-2008 program did have a loan buy down through VITA, the Ag Credit Program. Senator Starr, the Senate committee, asked me to reach out to VITA to see what would be the benefit of buying down interest rates by a point for the 3 months following, for the next 3 months, effectively, to see if that would be helpful to farming. And Cassie Polhamus, who is Joe Bradley's successor, was very responsive and very helpful, and very willing to brainstorm further on ways to help the ag and forestry industry. She responded that for the dairy portfolio, 3 months of interest is $163,000. For non-dairy, 3 months of interest is $112,000. So a 1% reduction in their rates will not have a material impact on their cash flow. Their total dairy portfolio is $65 million in assistance, and their non-dairy is $45 million. So in the case of dairy, the dairy farmers can't afford any payments with milk prices significantly below production cost. So any buy down really won't help them, is effectively her point. But she is available to brainstorm more if you would like to do that. I think the Senate committee is amenable to looking at other ideas. They just didn't get around to actually telling me to do it.
Okay.
So I have to kind of trying to stay within my lane and do what my clients asked me to do.
Right. Right. Yeah, thanks. So we're going to have to wrap this up pretty quickly. But John O'Brien has, I think, what will be our last question for the day. John?
Mike, would it help to have a legislatively created program to capture this money like this bill does? Or is this something potentially even the agency could set up a program on their own and get that and redirect that federal money? I didn't know if.
Well, you would have to appropriate the money to the agency for them to redirect it to farms. So
all federal money from COVID has to go through the legislature?
No. Well, yes, you're the constitutional entity with appropriation authority. But there is the Joint Fiscal Committee, which does have limited or some ability to make appropriation. There is some negotiation going on right now about the Joint Fiscal Committee having some ability to appropriate money directly to the executive branch to go forward and use that money for certain criteria. But for 1.25 billion or whatever subset of that significant subset, I think I would recommend that you have a direct appropriation to an agency to be consistent with the constitutional authority.
Okay, great.
But with that said, you could do what U.S. Congress did. They gave USDA $9.5 billion and said provide assistance to farmers. And USDA now has to figure out how to do that. And so if you wanted to do something very broad and give the agency, some generalized criteria, I think you could probably do that as well.
Great. Thanks, Mike. So I think we're going to wrap this up. Jane, we thank you for your.
I just wanted to note that I sent Linda a draft of the farmers market letter. So I'll ask her to send it out to the committee so you can review and let me know if you want to make any edits.
Perfect. Thank you so much. You were sort of reading our minds. We appreciate that. Jane, thank you so much for joining us today. And did you have a couple of last words?
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time. And if you have any other questions from the, wanting to hear from a dairy producer, you know how to get in touch with me. But I appreciate the time, and I also appreciate the effort that you all are putting into this. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks. So on Friday, we have pretty limited time. I think going forward, I'm going to try and get us to be able to meet at 8:30 on Fridays, but I wasn't able to accomplish that for this week. So we'll be meeting at 9 on Friday. And I would like to be able to vote the hemp, the 2 hemp amendments to 656 formally. And John, I don't know if you've got your little sketch pad there, but we will do it as just a roll call vote, but not, we're not using Everbridge. It's just going to be a roll call vote, and you'll conduct that. We'll have what we usually do in committee, and it will be both the language that the Senate Ag Committee sent us regarding hemp seed quality and properties, and the other language regarding the coming in compliance with the 2014 Farm Bill as opposed to 2018. And that we've discussed that language in the past, so that if you have any questions, please reach out to Mike O'Grady in order to get them answered, or to me, but I'm not totally expert on either of those, but we will be by the time it comes to the floor. I've had conversations with the speaker, and H656 will be dealt with pretty quickly when after we get by this next week or two, because of the growing season for hemp. We want to get that through. Sharon is going to be reporting that, except for the piece on feral swine, and that's you, John O'Brien. So we're going to be on the floor. Everybody's going to be paying attention, and I want you to be able to answer questions and be prepared. So if you need anything to be able to do that, please reach out. So are we all good? Any questions? Any last questions on any of this? John O'Brien.
Carolyn, yep. Going back to the tree wardens bill or this House Ag miscellaneous, how quickly are these apt to come up? Are we just going to be, on the floor one day and they're like, oh, let's bring up this. We've got an extra 20 minutes. Or is it going to be like, no, this isn't happening till August, or we'll just not know?
I think you'll have a little bit of warning. This usually comes up in meetings. The chairs meet every week on Wednesday afternoon, and we usually have a discussion about what's going to be brought up on the floor the following week. So I think we'll have a little bit of notice, but is that Brock? Is that Brock?
No, it's me barking at a chipmunk.
Okay. So if but you might want to start getting prepared. I'm not sure if there are 2 bills. We have the humane officer language, and we have the tree warden bill, aside from our housekeeping bill. So I'm hoping we can do both as well as housekeeping, but it's really going to be up to the speaker. So yeah, so I think you'll have a little bit of warning, but you might want to be preparing. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, Vicky has her hand up. Vicky.
Well, Mike is here on the phone. The question came up yesterday about the mandatory composting date, July 1st. Also, there's that chicken composting situation. Could you refresh our memories? Has this been changed, that date, the mandatory composting, or is that in Bobby's committee or natural resources, or where?
So the universal recycling of food residuals, that July 1st deadline has not been changed yet. The Agency of Natural Resources has asked both the House and Senate Natural Resources committees to make that change or propose it, but it has not been made yet. As to the requirements for compost foraging, ANR has decided to defer the requirement for farms to come into compliance until after next session. I can't remember the exact date off the top of my off the top of my head.
Just as a follow-up, is there a sense of, do you know, maybe not, but is there some urgency about the mandatory composting? Because it seems as though universal recycling, the composting aspect, because it seems as though we're not ready for it. Is there any sense of, anyone worried about it?
I think you find different perspectives from different parties and from different areas of the state. There are definitely people, a couple of haulers, maybe some solid waste management entities that are very concerned about implementation, whereas there are other solid waste management entities and a couple of other businesses that think the state is prepared and should go forward. I think A&R is trying to kind of split the difference by proposing to delay implementation by 6 months. But I think there's a lot of questions and discussion. Some people are saying that there isn't capacity in some areas of the state for the composting. Others are saying that businesses have not had the ability to prepare because of COVID. Some people are saying they don't have the workforce that's necessary because of COVID. Whereas others are saying it's been 8 years and the requirement has been on the books effectively in this manner for 8 years, and that businesses and solid waste management entities should have been preparing. So there's different arguments on both sides.
Okay, thanks, Mike. All right, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and we'll be back on Friday at 9 o'clock. So thank you.